The movie begins with a quote by Mark Twain, saying the two most important days in your life are the day when you were born and the day when you find out why. The film introduces us to Robert McCall, an exceptionally organized man who times his every move with a stopwatch, valuing precision and efficiency above all else. Now living a quiet life, he works part-time at a home improvement store where he's well-liked by his co-workers, who remain blissfully unaware of his history. During a lunch break, Robert chats with Ralphie, a colleague aspiring to become a security guard. Robert helps Ralphie with his diet and exercise regimen, encouraging him to reach his target weight. When Robert takes a bite of his tuna sandwich, he hears an unexpected crunch from hidden potato chips, using the moment to remind Ralphie that success comes from gradual improvement, not instant perfection. Robert's, plagued by sleepless nights, often finds solace at a local diner. He sits there, sipping tea and losing himself in the pages of a good book. He set a personal goal of reading 100 books, and his current choice is The Old Man and the Sea. Each evening, he crosses paths with a young girl who also frequents the diner. Their conversations are brief, but slowly becoming more meaningful with time.
You catch that fish yet?
Jazz hooked it.
About damn time.
Big fish.
Oh no. Yeah, well maybe he's just too old.
The next day, Roberts follows his usual work routine.
Hey, yo, Pops, we betting on what you did before you got here.
It was a stock dude, man. Who's on Wall Street?
I was a pip.
Admit they've been betting on what his previous job might have been. With a playful grin, Roberts jokingly claims he was a pip, one of the backup singers for Gladys Knight, and even does a quick dance to sell the story. His coworkers laugh, but aren't convinced, expecting a more mysterious past. That night, Roberts returns to the diner, and the same girl soon joins him. Noticing his new book, she asks how the last one ended.
You ever catch it? Fish.
Oh, yeah. Yes, yeah, you did.
Their chat is suddenly interrupted when a limo pulls up across the street. The girl gets a call from someone named Slavi, and though she hesitates, she heads outside and reluctantly steps into the waiting car. The next evening, Robert sees the same girl at the diner again. She joins him at his table and introduces herself as Alina. When he asks about the bruise on her face, she brushes it off, saying it was just a silly accident. Alina shares her dream of becoming a singer and gives Robert a CD of her music. He encourages her, telling her she can be anything she wants. Alina then notices the wedding ring on Robert's finger, and the conversation turns to his late wife. Later, as Robert walks her home, they are confronted by Slavi, who strikes Alina for supposedly disrespecting a client. Robert remains still as Slavi dismisses Alina as worthless and hands him a business card. Days pass, and Alina's absence from the diner becomes concerning. Eventually, the diner's manager reveals the truth. Alina is in the ICU, brutally beaten. Alarmed, Robert goes to the hospital, where he finds Mandy, a friend of Alina. When he approaches her, Mandy recoils, suspicious of who he is. After clarifying that they're just friends, Mandy confesses that she's trapped in the same grim business as Alina. She shares how Alina was brutally beaten by Slavi after standing up to one of his attacks, making her an example to others. That night, Mr. McCall contemplates the business card Slavi gave him and the CD Alina gifted him. He knows that if he doesn't intervene, Alina's life is in grave danger. But he's haunted by a promise to his late wife to never return to his violent ways. This inner conflict eats at him, tearing him apart, yet he ultimately decides he must act. As night falls, Robert follows Slavi to an apartment above a restaurant, where Slavi and his men are set to meet. Calmly, Robert enters, playing the polite guest, and offers an envelope with $9,800. The group mocks him at first, but Slavi eventually considers it. Nearly 10 grand for Alina's freedom. Just when they agree, Slavi twists the deal, saying the money would only buy her a month's freedom. Furious, Robert rejects the offer, and Slavi orders him to leave. Robert methodically arranges the glass skulls on the desk, positioning them to face each man in the room. He strides toward the door, but instead of leaving, he locks it, turning back to survey the room. After sizing up each man,
16 seconds.
he starts the timer on his watch and heads straight for Slavi. With lethal precision, Robert eliminates the remaining 3 men, brutally incapacitating them. As Tavy lunges at him with a broken bottle, Robert counters, grabbing a corkscrew from the counter and dispatching him in one swift motion. He stops his watch timer and, satisfied with his handiwork, calmly walks over to Slavi, settling down beside him. As Slavi's life ebbs away, Robert coldly predicts his fate, contrasting it with Alina's survival. After the carnage, Robert returns home to clean up, slipping his wedding ring back on as he apologizes to his late wife. Meanwhile, a Russian mobster named Teddy arrives in Boston, determined to find the man responsible for the killings. Joining forces with corrupt local cops, he orders surveillance footage from every camera within a 6-block radius and instructs them to take him to his lodging. Teddy's domineering attitude irritates the cops, but he snaps back, reminding them that he's there to do the job they couldn't. The next morning, crooked cop Frank Masters takes Teddy to the office of John Looney, a local Irish mob boss. During the tense meeting, John denies any knowledge of the murders, expressing his disdain for Russians and calling them reckless and arrogant. Teddy, unimpressed, dismisses John, calling him too dim-witted to orchestrate such a crime. He reveals the true reason for his visit, accusing the Irish of stealing from the Russians and warning that this will no longer be tolerated. As tensions escalate, Frank discreetly prepares for a fight. But before anyone can react, Teddy lashes out, attacking John with ferocity. Frank quickly shoots the 2 other men in the room, and Teddy mercilessly beats John to death. With the room now eerily quiet, Teddy turns to Frank and coldly announces his arrival. Moments later, Teddy receives a call from his boss, Pushkin. Teddy speculates that the murders were committed by an outsider, someone beyond their usual rivals, and even praises the level of skill involved. However, Pushkin dismisses Teddy's theory.
We cannot show weakness. I need this wrapped up quickly.
Well, I'm still sifting through things, but the killings were spontaneous. Whoever did this specialized in killing. I've rarely seen skills like this. I'll take care of it.
While reviewing security camera stills, Teddy spots Robert entering the building. Meanwhile, Robert realizes Ralphie hasn't shown up for his shift. Curious, he asks the schedule manager and learns that Ralphie suddenly quit without any explanation. Later, Robert visits the restaurant owned by Ralphie's mother. Ralphie explains he's taking time off to help his mom repair the place after an electrical fire the previous night. Though deemed accidental, Robert offers to help with the cleanup. As they finish, Robert can't shake his suspicion about the fire and presses Ralphie for more information. Ralphie seems unsure, but both know the fire wasn't an accident. That night, 2 crooked cops, Ramar and Peterson, are seen dining at Ralphie's mother's restaurant. They pressure her to close up early and extort her for protection money, threatening another accident if she doesn't keep up with the payments. Robert confronts them outside, claiming he wants to report crime. The officers brush him off and prepare to leave until one receives a personal call from Robert. He shows them a video he secretly recorded of their shakedown at a convenience store, which includes their confession to setting the restaurant fire. Amused, Robert tells them it's the only recording he needs. The officers threaten him, but Robert quickly disarms them and gives them a beating. He demands they return the money they extorted, warning them that if they don't, they'll be front-page news. Left with no choice, the corrupt cops comply and later repay Ralphie's mother. Elsewhere in the city, Teddy visits Mandy and confronts her about the lies she told during their previous conversation. When Teddy first arrived in Boston, he asked if she knew anything about Alina, and Mandy claimed they weren't close. However, Teddy has since uncovered that they are good friends, and he demands to know when Mandy last spoke to Alina. Mandy confesses that she visited Alina in the hospital a week prior and recalls seeing a concerned black man by her bedside. Pleased with her honesty, Teddy thanks her, but without warning, he grabs her in a chokehold, squeezing until she goes limp. That same afternoon, Robert is seen playing baseball with his coworkers. Ralphie shows up proudly in his new security guard uniform, having passed his certification. His colleagues cheer him on, and he tips his hat to Robert in gratitude. The following day, a criminal storms into the Home Mart store, aiming a gun at Jenny, the cashier, and demands the cash from the register. Calmly, Robert begins to empty the till, ready to let it pass. But when the robber insists on taking Jenny's ring, a cherished memento from her mother, Jenny refuses. Robert quietly observes the man's tattoos and baseball cap, but when a family with young children walks in, he chooses not to escalate the situation. He hands over the ring and discreetly follows the man to his car, noting the license plate. Later, the police reveal that the same man has been linked to a series of recent robberies. Robert reassures Ralphie, reminding him that no amount of money is worth a life. Shortly after, Robert retrieves a sledgehammer from the utility section. The next day, Jenny finds her ring back in the register, while Robert discreetly returns the freshly wiped hammer to its place. As night falls, Teddy shows up at McCall's home, posing as a detective investigating the deaths of 5 Russians. He shows Robert a photo of Mandy's body, framing her death as a tragic accident. Later that day, Robert purchases various travel items and forges a prescription for meclizine, a drug typically used for motion sickness on flights. Teddy's crew begins trailing Robert, with plans to capture and kill him. But Robert is already ahead of them. At the diner, he quickly identifies one of Teddy's men pretending to be a line worker, noting his unusually soft hands for someone supposedly in manual labor. Outside, a truck pulls up, blocking Frank's view of the scene. The undercover man draws an Uzi and orders Robert to leave with him. Calmly, Robert starts a stopwatch, then disarms and kills the thug using his book as a weapon. He plunges the diner into darkness and slips out, quietly snapping photos of Teddy and his crew in their car. Teddy orders his men to bring Robert in alive, and the chase begins. Robert leaves a trail of bloody handprints to mislead them, isolates one of the corrupt cops, and escapes with the officer's phone. Back at his apartment, Robert tends to a gunshot wound by applying boiled honey. Anticipating Teddy's next move, he quietly slips out, leaving the bathroom sink running. From a hidden vantage point, Robert watches as Teddy's men enter his apartment, discovering fake receipts for a flight to Mexico and an empty prescription bottle, deliberately planted to throw them off his trail. Teddy dismisses the evidence as a deliberate diversion, insisting that Robert is monitoring them even at that very moment. Meanwhile, Robert pays a visit to his old friends, Brian and Susan Plummer, both former colleagues from the agency he used to work for. Confident in Susan's ability to uncover crucial information about Teddy and his employers, Robert asks her to investigate. While Susan heads to the agency to gather intel, Brian expresses his relief at seeing Robert alive, revealing that Robert had faked his death years ago, a truth Susan had long suspected, believing Robert was too clever to be taken out by a mere car bombing. After returning by helicopter, Susan reports her findings to Robert.
Took out the East Coast hub of Vladimir Pushkin. In bed with the Russian mafia only.
Teddy, whose real name is Nikolai, is Pushkin's fixer. It also becomes clear that corrupt cops Romer and Peterson were on Pushkin's payroll, though they were recently found dead. Susan warns Robert that these men won't stop until he and everyone he cares about are dead. The next day, Robert returns to the city and tracks down Frank, cleverly luring him outside by triggering his car alarm, unaware that Robert is lying in wait. Robert traps Frank in his car, rigged with a hose to funnel carbon monoxide inside, turning the vehicle into a makeshift gas chamber. Desperate for information about Pushkin, Robert pressures Frank, who finally cracks and agrees to cooperate. Frank leads Robert to a warehouse where the Russians store their goods. Once there, Robert confronts the man in charge, forcing him to have his men surrender. Robert locks everyone, along with their money, in the warehouse's meat freezer. He then compels Frank to call the police, who arrive to arrest him and discover the frozen mobsters and their stash. Robert proceeds to Frank's safety deposit box, retrieving a USB stick containing critical information on Pushkin's operations. Elsewhere in the city, Teddy meets with a Russian mercenary to discuss Robert's assassination. When the mercenary leaves to use the restroom, Robert walks in moments later, holding the man's broken, bloody sunglasses. Facing Teddy, Robert presents him with a choice: call Pushkin and shut down his operations, or continue the hunt and meet a grim fate. Teddy, unshaken, dismisses Robert as a mere nuisance, something to be brushed aside. Unfazed, Robert begins recounting the story of a 12-year-old Russian orphan, abandoned and neglected, who is adopted by a kind man who offers him a home and family. However, a week later, the adoptive parents are found murdered in their bed. As Robert concludes the story, he implies that Teddy was the orphan, suggesting he killed his foster parents out of fear of abandonment. Teddy laughs off the suggestion, claiming he's not sentimental, as sentiment is a weakness. Before leaving, Robert leaves his phone number for Teddy, advising him to call once he's made his decision. As the night unfolds, Mr. McCall puts Frank's USB to work, siphoning millions from Pushkin's operations to the FBI. He discovers a list of Pushkin's oil tankers on the drive and rigs them with bombs, detonating them at the dock and effectively obliterating the vessels. In a fit of desperation, Teddy devises a new plan to lure McCall out. Armed with a team of mercenaries, he storms Home Mart, taking McCall's co-workers hostage and issuing a grim ultimatum. McCall has 30 minutes to reveal himself, or his friends will pay the price. Teddy attempts to track Robert's cell phone, only to realize he had left it on a bus as a diversion to infiltrate the store. Just then, a Gladys night and the Pips song blares over the intercom. The mercenaries single out Ralphie to lead them to the security room. Robert begins to improvise, transforming items around the store into lethal traps. He crafts a makeshift gallows with barbed wire and a heavy bag of gravel. When a second mercenary discovers his comrade hanging there, he barely has time to react before McCall strikes, using a gardening tool to finish him off. In a tense confrontation, Teddy shoots Robert in the shoulder, but Robert quickly escapes, using a torch and doorknob to cauterize his wound. Two more of Teddy's henchmen stumble upon the scene, spotting a torch precariously positioned over a puddle of gasoline with a wire attached. Suspecting a trap, they choose to ignore it and move on. Robert takes out the first man, waiting patiently for the second before dispatching him as well. Ralphie rushes to help Mr. McCall, but is shot in the leg for his trouble. Quickly assessing the situation, Robert instructs Ralphie to get to the breaker box and restore power in exactly 40 seconds. As Ralphie sprints to complete his task, Robert lures another henchman into a lounge room, leaving a trail of blood as bait. When Ralphie restores the power, the henchman finds himself trapped in a room filled with cans of compressed oxygen inside a microwave. The sudden surge activates the microwave, resulting in a massive explosion that obliterates the attacker. Racing against time, Teddy makes his way to Ralphie with lethal intent, but Robert intervenes. Armed with a nail gun, he fires nails into Teddy's pressure points, incapacitating him. Overwhelmed and desperate, Teddy demands to know Robert's identity. But Robert merely gazes at him, before delivering a final shot that ends Teddy's reign of terror. 3 days later, Robert travels to Moscow, intent on confronting Pushkin.
I'd stay in there if I were you. Who are you? Everybody wants to know. What do you want? I want the head of the snake.
And now you've come to kill me.
Pushkin attempts to bribe his way out, but Robert vanishes before he can react. As Pushkin reaches for a weapon beside the overflowing sink, he steps onto exposed wires left behind by Robert. His final screams echo throughout the mansion as he is electrocuted and meets his demise. As Robert departs from Pushkin's estate, he walks past the lifeless bodies of the guards and makes his way home. Upon his arrival, he finds Alina, who is on the mend. She shares the news that she secured a proper job and has taken up reading. Additionally, she reveals that she discovered an envelope containing $9,800 among her belongings at the hospital. Grateful for the positive changes in her life, she subtly implies that Robert is the one who set her free. Months later, Robert posts an online ad, branding himself as the equalizer. He offers his unique skills to those in need. Soon, he receives a coded email requesting assistance, to which he simply replies, "Yes." Thank you for watching. Subscribe and press the bell icon if you like the video, and let us know your thoughts in comment section. See you in next one.